That's a bit more zoomed in than I expect. Oh, no. Out, out. That'll do. Hello, welcome to today's video. My name is Lois. Get yourselves a drink. I've had to make coffee the old school way today because I looked in the cupboard and there's no coffee pods, so we're on the instant coffee. And yeah, it's a very windy day here. Kind of sad, probably not going to want to go out too much. So I thought I would do a video. So today I'm going to be going through all the books that I read over summer. Summer being probably like late June to the beginning of September. And yeah, I've got 6 books to show you, so not too many, but yeah, I hope you enjoy the video and let's get started. I can't remember if I showed you before or not, but I actually have a notebook that I write notes for all the books that I've read. I write down the date that I finished them, a little star out of 5, and then just like notes, things I want to remember about them, or things that really stood out to me at the time. So yeah, I recommend getting one of these because I don't know about you, but I read things and then it just disappears from my mind afterwards. Or like there's only certain very key points that will stick out to me, which I think is a cool thing about rereading a book because there might be very different things that stick out to you on a second or third read. Not that I've been doing much rereading, but I think it's a good idea. So first up we have Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and I read this in this beautiful copy, the Cranford collection, I think also called the Timeless Classics collection. And yeah, I really enjoyed it, even more so reading from this very lovely copy. I really like the colour of this one. I also have another copy of Little Women, so I'm not sure what I'm doing with that one, but yeah, I liked it. I think it was difficult to get into, but I find that with quite a lot of books. Perhaps more so with this as well because it's quite a slow story. But yeah, I thought it was a really beautiful concept for the story. So there are 4 sisters. I have to try and remember their names because it's been a while. So we have Jo, Beth, Meg and Amy. And you just follow their lives over the period of about a year. I think it starts at Christmas and then finishes at Christmas as well. And each of the girls has their own personalities, their strengths, their weaknesses. And I feel like over the year you just really see them all grow. So I think Jo was struggling with like anger and boisterousness. Amy was she very proud? Is that the best way of describing it? Beth was very shy and, I can't remember about Meg. But what was also really lovely was the parents in this book. I feel so often in stories nowadays, parents are given a very bad rep. They're always like very dysfunctional. Whereas in this story, so their father was off at war, I think is in the Civil War. My history is not the best. And then he's very ill for a period, so he's absent for a lot of the story, but you can still see how much the girls all love him and want to make him proud. And their mother is just such a lovely, lovely character. She's just very human. She's very encouraging to them. So as I said, all the girls have their own struggles and ways that they're growing. And instead of the mother just telling them off or ignoring them, she's always pointing them gently in the right direction, which I think is so lovely. And it's just very wholesome, some nice underlying Christian themes. So yeah, just more of a recap of my notes. I just put a very wholesome story, quite slow paced, following the everyday lives of the March sisters, their interactions, faults, growth, virtues, with their loyal friend Laurie, and their humble, loving and wise mother who points them to God, in whom they can find true peace and comfort, a simple and joyful life. So yeah, I really enjoyed Little Women. I definitely recommend it. And yeah, so next up we have The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. You see we've got some nice page markers in there. I did actually write quite a lot of notes on this book, and you know what, even though I only read it a few months ago, I'm already feeling the need to reread this book because it is so relevant in the 21st century. It's also a really easy read, like the text is very, it's very broken up, it's very easy to get through. So yeah, it says on the front, how to stay emotionally healthy and spiritually alive in the chaos of the modern world. And it is very much, does what it says on the tin. It's very spiritual, but it's also very practical. It addresses some really big things that I'm not always sure that Christians want to address, but things that I think are also some of the biggest issues that we're facing today. So he's talking about distraction, technology, consumerism, hurry. But we are going to have to go back to some of my notes because it has been a while. I've put that I really enjoyed, it's an easy read and it pointed out things that I'd already noticed as well as some fresh observations. So it focused on 3 main topics, each of them beginning with an S, which is hopefully easy to remember. One of them is Sabbath, the idea of rest and renewal, and John Mark Comer was saying that he was trying again to practice Sabbath, even though there are some contentions about whether it's still a command that applies to Christians today. But it's saying that rest and the rest and renewal of the Sabbath is something that is made for us, and without it we are struggling with all this hurry, and days off can turn into just days doing chores and not really resting and spending time with family. And yeah, there was also a section on simplicity, so he was talking a lot about minimalism, to resist injustice and free ourselves. So yeah, I think he was talking a lot about this emphasis on consumerism, on always feeling a need to buy things and have a lot of things around. And it is true that having more things and buying things and always feeling like you're lacking can just be a distraction of so many of the blessings that we're given by God, and also just a distraction from things that maybe you're worrying about or anxious about. The last section is silence/solitude, and yeah, he was just talking about the importance and value of having that time alone with God in a quiet place where you're not distracted. And yeah, I feel like I want to reread this because I have the main chapters, but I feel like the details I'm just kind of lacking again now. I have other notes, I'm not sure if these are quotes, they probably are. The goal is practice, not perfection. Make it your ambition to live a quiet life. The drive to possess is an engine for hurry. What if you only had what you needed and there wasn't anything to organise? So yeah, I definitely recommend this book. I'm recommending it to you, I'm also recommending it to me to reread. So that was how good I think it is if I already feel an urgent need to reread it. But yeah, it's one of those books as well that is giving you a lot of advice, but also the value is in implementing things, and implementing things is a lot more difficult, so yeah. So next we have A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis, although it wasn't originally published under his name, it was published under a pseudonym until he passed away. But yeah, this is a really nice copy, it's a reader's edition, so yeah, about 60 pages of it is actually A Grief Observed, and then the rest of it are short commentaries by quite a few public figures and writers there, so it was interesting to read their experiences with grief and their experiences reading this book. But yeah, I really liked that Lewis is very honest and he doesn't just say what's expected or what other people want him to say. I think that was what was quite powerful about it originally being published under a pseudonym, is that there wasn't quite as much pressure. But yeah, I do feel like quite often sorrow and grief can be undermined or dismissed even. Like there is quite an expectation just to move on and get on with your life. But your whole life has changed and that's not at all an easy or sometimes possible thing to do. Whilst I myself am not going through grief, I've known people who are, and I'm just curious because it's something that everybody is going to have to go through. He writes, "An odd byproduct of loss is that I'm aware of being an embarrassment to everyone I meet. To some I'm worse, I am a death's head. Whenever I meet a happily married pair, I can feel them both thinking, one or the other of us must someday be as he is now." And yeah, I think people do feel embarrassed when meeting people who've had a loved one pass away, because at the same time you want to acknowledge it to them, you don't want to pretend that this massive thing in their life isn't there, but at the same time it's a very sensitive issue and you just don't really know where you stand. My dog is staring at me. What do you want? What do you want? He's quite unsettled today. And one of the other things that I found really interesting was his talking about memory and the memory of the person who you've lost. He's written, "I can feel the slow, insidious beginning of a process that will make the H," who is his wife he is referring to, that will make the H I think of into a more and more imaginary woman. When you're having to remember things, it's because you're not seeing them every day. If they're there in front of you, you can't mistake the real thing for something you're making up in your mind and what your own feelings and imagination are putting onto them. So that was something that really struck me and that I've thought about since. So yes, he is also wrestling as well with the question of how can God be good when he's going through so much seemingly unnecessary pain. and this is definitely a book to reread as well. Probably not in the near future, but definitely again at some point in my life. And I definitely recommend it to anybody who's going through grief or some kind of pain that they can't really understand. Or if you feel like you're asking questions and you're not getting answers, I feel like it's a good book. So next we have a little bit more of a cheery book. We have The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. So yeah, I decided I really love these copies, although unfortunately, though I bought this new, it's gotten quite worn already. But I now have all 3 of the copies and they make a tree. Like, maybe I have to show you in a different video, but yeah, I hadn't read Lord of the Rings before, but my brothers had been asking me for so long to read them because they both really love the books and the films. I'm constantly making references to things that I didn't know, so I wanted to be in on the club. And of course, reading C.S. Lewis, I feel like you have to read Tolkien as well because I feel like they're compared and contrasted quite a lot. So prior to reading The Fellowship of the Ring, the only fantasy I'd really been reading is the Narnia books, which are obviously a lot smaller and aimed at children, so they're a lot easier to get through. But yeah, otherwise I was really excited to start another fantasy trilogy. And I again did find it a little bit slow to start with. I feel like almost in a similar way to Little Women, it's just people living quite tranquil lives in a small village and it's quite peaceful. But I did really enjoy it, especially the more and more I got into it. I like the idea of going on a journey, leaving your hometown, some kind of quest, and I just thought it was interesting. It's a topic I've kind of discussed with my brothers a little bit as well, like should you stay at home in your village where you've always lived and just build a life and settle there, or should you go off into the unknown and the adventure? Because there are both pros and cons to both, and I feel like sometimes going away and leaving home can be kind of glamorized. But in Lord of the Rings, he's always looking back to the Shire, to where he came from, and the reason he's left, whilst he has brilliant adventures and does grow, it's not necessarily a pleasant experience travelling either, and he does have an objective and an agenda for doing so. So I thought that was interesting. I enjoyed the admirable qualities in the characters, so friendship, self-sacrifice. I love it when you read about that in stories because I don't think it's talked about and promoted so much nowadays. I feel like we live in a very individualistic world where it's like, look after yourself first. Whereas in this book, I remember really enjoying in Dracula the themes of friendship, to a fair degree in Little Women as well. I just really love seeing those character traits. I also really enjoyed the fictional languages, so you have Elvish, a bit of Dwarvish, and yeah, I quite like languages, so I think it is so cool that Tolkien had been writing all these languages out in their own different alphabets. I just thought that was amazing. I was a little bit nervous that there was going to be too much songs and poetry because I do remember there being quite a lot of songs in The Hobbit, but I did enjoy them and I liked how a lot of the songs and poems were kind of telling a story as well and giving you more context to the world of Middle-earth. I really loved the character of Tom Bombadil. I just thought he was so fun and mysterious. And also like the name sounds so cool. Like Tom Bombadil, it's just so fun to say. I did struggle sometimes with some of the language, like descriptions of things like bows, is that how you say it? B-O-U-G-H, and barrows and things like that I didn't quite understand. But I think from reading more, you just kind of get the gist of what things mean. I also really like the ending because I love it when I read a book and I'm just there like, it's getting near the end but I really can't anticipate how it's going to finish. And while this is only part of the story, I still thought like you've got to finish The Fellowship of the Ring somehow. There has to be some kind of ending or draw to the next book, and I really liked how it ended. This is a little bit of a spoiler if you've not read The Fellowship of the Ring, but how Frodo and Sam end up parting from the group and kind of Frodo putting on the ring and escaping from Boromir who's trying to steal it off him. I've been saying to my brother when I was reading it, like, I think Boromir is very suspicious, so I thought it was a good ending to that. So yeah, that's The Fellowship of the Ring. I recommend you reading it if you've not, and yeah. So the next book I read was Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and I've been meaning to read this for a while. I had tried reading it once before, but I think I got stuck on the first or second chapter, but I was a bit more intentional and perseverant this time, and I did manage to get through it. But yeah, I've written in my notes that it's a dystopia where social stability is number one and it's achieved through happiness, making everyone happy. It's full of social conditioning, pleasure, entertainment, recreational sex, drugs, but no art, no love, no God, no pain, no struggle. So yeah, at first I thought this is obviously so fake and empty, why would anyone want to live that way? But at the end, there was a bit of a monologue by one of the world leaders or world controllers trying to justify the way they're living to an outsider called the Savage, and he was actually really, really persuasive. He does make you doubt, oh, maybe there are good things about living this way. Whilst I still don't think we should choose that, and the majority of people, I would hope, wouldn't think that we should choose that, it was just interesting that he did make such a persuasive case for it. I've written as well, what I really liked about Huxley's writing is there are a few scenes where it almost felt like a film, because he was just switching between narratives really quickly, but like they were all brought together as well, like different things would be happening between different characters, but they were all pointing to one kind of theme or issue, and it just really built tension in a really good way. Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well to compare to 1984, like the use of force versus this use of happiness. Like they're both quite dark and twisted in their own ways. It's got some very current themes as well, like I find it so interesting reading novels about technology and technology fixing all of our problems, and I don't know, if we had technology to fix stuff like sickness, aging, unhappiness, should we do that? Is it ethical? Is it moral? Yeah, I just thought it was so interesting. I thought it was well written as well. The characters were quite persuasive. The majority of them, it wasn't like there was a really clear hero. They all were battling with different things. Some of the characters were happy being in this society. Some of them were unhappy and were a little bit heroic, and some of them were unhappy but also very cowardly. And yeah, I also thought the ending was really strong as well. This was also one of those novels where I wasn't sure how it was going to end, and it was great. It was powerful, it was shocking, it was horrible. One of the things that stood out to me as being different from our society today though is that it's very collectivist, and I still think that in the West we're very individualistic. That's one of the things that I felt prevented us from being exactly like Brave New World, but we are still very consumerist and capitalist. And for example, in Brave New World, they were trying to condition you so you wouldn't even enjoy just going out for a walk or just going out and enjoying the flowers. You'd have to only enjoy things that involved purchasing and buying things. Like they would only encourage you to do sports which involved buying loads of new equipment all the time. Yeah, I thought it was just so much to say about this book. I definitely recommend reading it if you haven't already. I know that during COVID everyone was reading 1984, but now we're in a new season, I definitely think Brave New World is the dystopian novel to read. So the last book I read was The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis. I don't know why I said it in that strange way, I guess because last book, last battle. But yeah, I finally finished the Narnia series, which I'm happy about, but sad there's no more for me to read. But yes, I really enjoyed it. It's very light fantasy, light as in like it's easy to read. I always love the diagrams in the Narnia books. I just find them so lovely, especially in these copies where it's in colour and it's lovely. In the full colour collector's edition, I definitely recommend these copies of the Narnia books. But yes, I didn't have too much knowledge about The Last Battle. Obviously the Narnia books have a lot of biblical allegories in them. In the first one you have like the kind of creation story in Narnia, and you have the character of Aslan being like a representation of Christ. So I knew that the last book was probably going to have some representations of bits and pieces from the Book of Revelation. So I was really excited for that because I've always struggled with the Book of Revelation. I feel like there's so many different interpretations that people feel passionate about, and I don't know, I've never really been massively into like end times stuff. So I thought, C.S. Lewis is writing for a children's book. It must be fairly easy to understand, or he must be getting some kind of point across through it. So this idea of the Antichrist is kind of represented in here. So you have Aslan, who's representative of Christ. In this book, you have an ape and a donkey, and the ape is very clever, and he's making out to the donkey that the donkey is too stupid to make any decisions for himself, so he has to trust everything that the ape says because the ape is much smarter than him. And the ape gets the donkey to dress up in this lion skin that they find, pretending to be Aslan and giving orders to the Narnians. And as you might tell, this doesn't go very well. So yeah, that's interesting to see the idea of the Antichrist represented in that way. I thought it was interesting that he had an ape kind of in control, because I guess it's got similar connotations with a human, but like not quite, kind of like a mock human. And he's also like a mock version of Christ as well, so I thought that was cool. Yeah, I enjoyed the fantasy, again the nobility and the beautiful character of the characters. And I liked that Lewis was not afraid to involve violence and threat and scary things, even though it's for children. So they also have this idea of like a foreign god in the book as well, which I thought was interesting, called Tash, and how they try and confuse Aslan and Tash together and try and pretend that they're the same, and then in the end they just get rid of Aslan and try and get them to worship Tash. So I thought that was interesting as well. And then you have the end of Narnia, like the end of the world, and I thought that was very beautifully described. And then in the end, where they're in like the kind of new Narnia, it reminded me a lot of C.S. Lewis's other book, The Great Divorce, and this idea of everything being like more real than it was in the previous world. I did find it a little bit, how do I describe it? I don't know, it felt like everyone was kind of invincible and had all these powers as soon as they came into the new world, which I wasn't the biggest fan of, but overall I really enjoyed the story, and I'm just gonna briefly mention the big spoiler that I already knew about, so if you don't want to hear the spoiler then stop watching now or skip forward a few minutes. But yeah, so the children die in a train accident. All the children who had believed and been to Narnia, apart from Susan, who no longer believes or wants anything to do with Narnia. And yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I thought it was going to be really grim and horrible from the way that some people had talked about it online before, but actually it wasn't. Like, the children weren't in pain, they were happy, they were in Narnia. It's only very briefly mentioned that they're actually now not alive in the other world. I thought it was quite powerful. It's interesting that I'm talking about death again after reading Lewis's book on A Grief Observed, which is very much the other sense. It's about your experience on Earth having lost people to death, whereas on this it's like the other side, it's once they've already died, where are they now? Whereas it didn't speak too much about that experience for Susan, who now has lost all of her family in this accident. So it's interesting to look at those two quite different perspectives of the same coin. I'm not sure if I have much more to add to that, but I do think it's interesting because I've always really struggled with the idea of an afterlife. Whilst there's so much of Christianity that really makes sense to me and I can accept very easily, that is something that I've always struggled with, because you can't see it, like you can't see the effects of it either. When there's a lot of things to do with morality and decisions and how you're living your life now, you can see the ramifications of that in front of you, even if it's slowly and over time. But death is not something you can really see what they're experiencing or going through at all. So I did think it was very interesting, and I'm definitely going to be thinking about it a bit more and seeing if I have any other thoughts on it. So yeah, that is all the books that I read over summer and maybe a tiny bit into autumn. But yes, I was also considering doing a video on my collection of C.S. Lewis books. I probably have about 15 to 20 maybe. I've not read all of them, but probably 2/3 of them I would say. So let me know if you would like me to go through those. I probably will anyway at some point. But yes, I hope you enjoyed the video. I really enjoyed reading all these books. I don't think there were any of them here that I didn't learn something on, or any of them that didn't make me think a little bit deeper. So I recommend all of them if you want to read any of them. Take your pick. And I enjoyed talking about them again now to refresh my memory about reading them. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!